this. So I'm Jim Leahy with PCC. I've been with PCC for about 13 years now in a variety of capacities. Worked in software support when I first started, worked on Notify setups and implementations, worked on our implementation team, folks like Nick and others who do new client implementations. I did that role years back with a lot of startups, a lot of big practices, both EHR and practice management. Was a team lead for a while on our support team, and now work in kind of an application support role. So when folks have a really kind of in-depth issue with PCC EHR, oftentimes they reach out to me. And so a lot of back-end database forensics, things like that. I've spent a lot of time working on our variety of the modules that we have here in the EHR. Worked with our delivery team that provides a lot of the clinical updates and the like for PCC EHR. So these are all features that are kind of near and dear to my heart. What we're going to focus on here is really just kind of a cursory review of PocketPCC. By a quick show of hands, how many of you use PocketPCC on a daily basis? How about weekly basis? Okay. We have some folks who, for them it's an indispensable tool. I was just talking with Dr. Varadi from Pelican Pediatrics, and she was reporting something that had happened. It's a bug that we've actually fixed in the next release, and was saying like she literally uses it every day to chart. On the go, between kids' sports practices and the office. She's in the car dictating. I'm just like imagining it. She's this really lively woman who's like a bit shorter than I am, and I'm just imagining her in the car like dictating her visits as she goes. And it's a really cool way that one can access the system and keep you connected without having to be tethered to your laptop. So talking a bit about what I want to cover with this session, the objectives here. I want to make sure that you guys understand what the key capabilities are for PocketPCC and how you might use it. We're going to spend some time looking at how to navigate the interface. I want you to be able to feel some confidence in navigating charts, prescriptions, and tasks inside PocketPCC. We'll talk about the key differences between PocketPCC and the rest of the EHR. There are some notable areas where PocketPCC does not provide functionality right now that the rest of the EHR does. And so I think understanding where those differences are and when you would use the regular EHR versus Pocket makes some good sense. We'll talk about some of the recent improvements that we've made to Pocket. There have been a bunch in some of the recent updates, and plenty more to come. And then lastly, I just want to make sure that you guys recognize how it can optimize the workflows for you and for your staff on the go. Towards the end, we'll spend a couple minutes at the very end doing essentially a survey of you folks both in person and online to see what you'd like to see in updates with PocketPCC. So by virtue of being in this session, you get to actually let us know what would be helpful to you, and perhaps in the next couple of releases we'll see those elements make their way to PocketPCC. So what is Pocket? For those who have used it, it's that web mobile interface that we have to PCC EHR. You access it from a browser. You can really fire it up from any browser. And whether it's on your phone, whether it's on a desktop, you access that by using your practice acronym .pcc.com/PocketPCC, and you'll log in, using your credentials. This, it's ideal for clinicians and any staff who are on the move. So you think about PocketPCC. Does anybody in your office who's like an MA or nurse use Pocket while they're rooming patients? Okay, that is actually a use case. We've had some practices reach out and say, what, I would love, to install PCC EHR on, let's say an iPad, okay, or some other lightweight device, and be able to room patients, do just basic intakes, vitals, indicate who the respondent is who brought them in, and just a couple of basic questions, right? You could do that with PocketPCC. We made an update quite a while ago, one of the 9.something releases, where we made vitals available in PocketPCC, because that was the big stopper. Without vitals, the folks who were doing that rooming, they get stopped dead in their tracks, right? So we made that available. So Pocket has a lot of use cases, including, oh, hey, Amanda. Has a lot of use cases, including for your MAs and the like. But when we think about the benefits of Pocket, I mean, that mobility is the big thing. Having to carry your laptop around to do your work, sitting down at the end of the day and pulling up your laptop. I mean, for a lot of us, we're tethered, at the hip to an iPhone, to an Android device. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but it's always on me, practically, for better or for worse. So the ability to be able to pull up your phone or mobile device and access a chart anytime, anywhere is really clutch. In terms of efficiency, we've really designed it so that the workflows are quick, okay? The rest of the EHR has a ton of functionality, lots of clicks into different areas, configuration, reports, other tools. Pocket dispenses with a lot of those functions and really focuses on the core of the chart itself. In terms of security, there's device verification and session control. So you can rest assured that that device itself that you're logging into, you've got a secure connection. There is essentially like a two-factor authentication that you're doing, and there is a session timeout after a period of time. So if you left the device out for a bit. There's some logout controls and things like that, as well as re-authentication over a period of time. And as far as Pocket's concerned, we're continuously updating this piece of software in tandem with the rest of PCC. So we may not add that newest feature right to Pocket right then and there, but within a few releases, oftentimes we're adding something that's a core function of PCC to Pocket. And a lot of that driven by the feedback from folks in the room here, the clients that we work with, when you let us know, hey, it'd be really cool to use this in Pocket, we consider making that available. Of course, ERX was probably the hottest, thing that people wanted for the longest time. Putting ERX inside, PocketPCC as well as, EPCS. And there were some challenges originally with how are we going to do that, that we were able to surmount, and we finally made that available. So when you get started with Pocket, is there anybody here who hasn't ever logged into PocketPCC? Just curious. Okay. So what you're going to do, there is, first off, there are layers of control here, in terms of Pocket. So you would need, somebody in your office to provide you with that level of access, okay, through user administration. From there, you're going into My Account, okay? In the top left-hand corner, I would show you, some of this stuff, or maybe I can swipe over to the EHR in a little bit and walk through some of that. But ultimately, PocketPCC security requires that there's a question and answer that you enter, okay? And that's going to be your gateway into Pocket. So not only do you have to have that access, granted by the practice, but you also have to answer that security question, And if you're entering, if you're using a new device for the first time, with your login, you're going to be prompted, with that. And periodically, you will be, asked to repeat that question, to re-log in. Again, I think it's, I'll get to it in a second, but like a 2-month basis where, we kick you out and, make you re-authenticate that device. But you do need that proper role permission and that security question set up. We do support bookmarking, adding to the home screen. It functions kind of like an app without being an app. So you don't need to download an application on, a computer that you just picked up. You literally just navigate to, that link in your browser, ACRO being your unique practice acronym, .pcc.com/PocketPCC. You can add that to your home screen. Acts like a bookmark or an application, but is really just a website. So yeah, first-time devices will require you to answer that security question. You're going to be re-prompted every 2 months. Every once in a while, folks reach out to us and they say, hey, every single time I try to log into Pocket, it's asking me to re-authenticate. And what I would suggest in those cases is, number one, if you've ever made that mistake where you accidentally put yourself in private mode on a browser, you'll find that it often breaks any of those links, okay? So make sure you're not in the private browsing mode, number one. Number two, if you're continuing to run into issues like this, this is where we suggest clearing out your cache, your cookies in your web browser, refresh everything with it, and give it another try. Usually those things resolve whatever problem you're having with PocketPCC in terms of authentication. There is a session timeout as well. That part's configurable in practice preferences. So if you want that timeout to be, let's see, I can show you guys real quick. If I can press that X. Nope. Try escape. There we go. So here in the EHR, under configuration, practice preferences. I made a joke yesterday that practice preferences where we kind of, it's a one-stop shop. We throw everything in there if there isn't a menu to put it in. So until we create like a menu that says PocketPCC and create enough functionality there, there's it lives here. But you can set your session timeouts for both the EHR and PocketPCC. And we've got, the EHR timeouts are a little bit more configurable. The session timeouts with PocketPCC, you've got 15, 30, 45, 1 hour, 2 hours, and 4 hours, okay? So if you leave that phone out for 15 minutes and you've been logged in, it's going to log you out, okay? And that's intentional, in addition to any locks that you have on your phone, which I would highly recommend. If you don't have your phone locked after a period of time, you're using PocketPCC, you absolutely should have some security there as well. But that is configurable for your practice. I will say if there's any questions that come up throughout, please feel free to interrupt me. So again, as I mentioned, things like private incognito browsing are going to reset device trust. Okay, that security question is going to be required every single time. And so invariably when somebody reaches out to us and says, hey, I'm having this problem, that's the first question we ask. We're like, is your phone by chance in private browsing mode? Or your device? And oftentimes they check, they go, oh yeah, it is. And it's so easy to make that mistake. If you're normally in regular browsing, it's easy to accidentally, as you're adding a new tab, move into private browsing depending on the device that you're using. So in terms of navigating patient charts, there's a lot that you can cover within PocketPCC. The schedule, the RX queue is the newest addition, messaging and signing. When we think about like the left-hand navigation is built to be, those quick hits to kind of tabs in the EHR. Okay, so when you think about the way we've structured Pocket, if you want to, think about it in sort of like the EHR itself, we've got that finder feature for finding a patient. We've got your schedule screen, we've got your RX queue, we've got messaging, and we've got signing. So you think about like comparing that to the EHR for a second here. So that left-hand hamburger menu is much this. We've got our finder, we've got our schedule screen. We don't have visit tasks, there, but we've got our, eLab results, messaging and signing. Okay. Now we compare that to back to Pocket, and here's what we've got for our queues. Okay. And that's going to allow you to seamlessly toggle between the patient chart, one patient chart and another using that left-hand navigation. Okay, it's the right-hand navigation that then takes us into the individual patient elements like medical summary, demographics, immunizations, visits, and even ERX now. So when you think about it, we've got really a number of core clinical features we've added to Pocket. The latest and greatest is prescriptions. Okay, folks have been asking about that for a while, and with prescriptions, you have that capability to create new prescriptions. You can renew and refill entries that are there in that RX queue, and manage that queue at kind of a high level. There are some elements of the RX management that are not available in Pocket directly. When we think about pharmacy responses, soft tokens, logs, things like that, we haven't added that to PocketPCC. If any of you attended talks that Morgan gave about PocketPCC and DRX, the soft token thing was really interesting. From the shore scripts kind of end of things and beyond, we can't let you use that same phone that you're prescribing from as your soft token. So you really do have to use a hard token if you're going to use ePCS as your second factor of authentication. And that was really the biggest hurdle when we were building ERX into the phone. That was always the concern, was like, how would we do this so that we're not in that violation? And they did a lot of awesome work to make that available. So got over that hurdle, now have ERX capabilities through PocketPCC. Phone notes and tasks. You can easily document and manage those phone calls inside Pocket. Portal messaging, you can reply directly to portal messages through Pocket. You've got the ability to edit vitals. So we think about, again, working up a patient as an MA. You can pull up that lightweight device and do all that work right then and there. Uploading photos and files, oftentimes folks use PocketPCC for that. For example, if you were in a situation where the scanner at the front desk that you use for insurance cards were to die, or you were constantly running into issues where, somebody's scanning, on that device, let's say some demographic paperwork or whatever, jamming up, that workflow, you could literally use PocketPCC as a way to essentially scan in anything. You're taking a photo of it and you're adding that photo to the patient chart, on the fly. So it takes the place of a scanner in a way, too. I don't think it would be great for, let's say, a 50-page document sitting there and, taking picture after picture, but for an insurance card, something simple, you could do that with Pocket. And then signing documents, we've got that ability to sign, visits, phone notes, and, documents directly within Pocket, and have made some enhancements on that front. So when I kind of compare and contrast, like, hey, what can you do in Pocket that you can't do, or what can you do in PCC HR that you can't do in Pocket? In terms of the basic, functions of, clinical elements, you can do most things. We added, more and more features. Things like scheduling appointments. You can't do yet, but you can see your patient schedule. You can go into patient charts in both. Prescribing, that was a big blocker for a long time. Now you get that basic, ERX access with EPCS through a hard token. You don't get the full RX queue that has, all the other elements of it. The administrative logs and reports, soft token, all that's going to be housed in PCC EHR. Okay, but you can do most, prescribing. When we think about like prescribing that you would do from your phone, most of that's going to be that single prescription for that patient, or a couple of prescriptions, very quickly, maybe an EPCS, but that full level of management is not something you necessarily need from a phone. Phone notes and tasks, portal messages, signing queue, vitals attachments, you can do all those things. Placing orders, not something we can really do yet. There's some specialized elements that are inside the chart that we don't have access to with Pocket, but most everything, that you would need for, a lightweight mobile device, you can do inside PocketPCC. So what did we do in recent updates with Pocket? In 9.9, we added better visibility of draft messages. We had done a lot of work with draft messages and some cleanup there on that front. And so wanted to make it much more apparent that you were saving this message as a draft, but it had not been sent for portal messages. So we wanted to make that visible to you. The other big thing, of course, was adding in PCC RX in that right-hand menu. Now we didn't just have
medical summary, demographics, and the like. We now have PCC RX that you can get into and access. And I love this particular feature as well, not just because I put Chewbacca on the top of it, but the ability to actually see and preview documents. It used to be that with a document, you'd actually have to download that to your device to see it. Now when you open it up, you get a preview mode of that document, and depending on the scale that you're working with, you may be able to see most of what you need without downloading that document to your device to work with it. So I would like to try to get into Pocket a little bit and show you guys some of what I was going to demo. We're going to try to figure this out. So apologies for the technical issues. We had some problems with my Mac connecting, but let me see what I can connect to here for PocketPCC. And Fisher, you'd suggested Zoom, right, as a possibility?
Zoom, yeah, I think that's probably your best option from your Mac to there.
Okay, would you want to assist real quick while I get that set up for me? Yeah, with the virtual attendees, I think we normally could just turn down the mic a little bit and it wouldn't be a problem, but I think everybody online would hear the system essentially farting constantly, and we don't want that.
Yeah, you want to create a meeting and
Yep.
hand jam the link in, or you can.
Yeah, let's just. So annoying. I've been dealing with some speaker issues on my, that's fine. Let's try 742.
Oh, yeah, okay, join.
You're not alone.
There are like a million ways to join meetings, and it's
Yeah.
never easy to find it. There we are. Give me the ID there.
Okay, yep, let me do that again. So it should be 742 769 3780.
37.
Oh.
Oh,
You're in the allow block. There you go.
Sorry, one more time.
Don't worry about it. 742 769 3780.
Sweet. Go ahead and share your screen.
Hey, hey, there we go.
Beautiful. See if I can get you full screen. Cool.
Alrighty, thank you guys for bearing with me here. It's an unfortunate set of snafus, but I think we got past that with this here. So we're gonna dive into PocketPCC. Things look good on the.
Yeah, look good.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Alrighty, so I'm gonna log in here as a test user. Alrighty. So, what I'm doing here, as I log in, it takes me to my schedule screen. If you haven't used Pocket before, what it lets you do is choose your provider in this list here. And we get our schedule. We've got this schedule widget, which is, very similar to what we've got, in the schedule screen where you can click on a calendar and navigate ahead or, back in time to various appointments. One of the things that folks loved about Pocket, before we added this to the EHR was the ability to see an appointment note. That was something that was always really cool. Block notes, things like that, are available in Pocket, but not always available in the schedule screen. Of course, blocks aren't available in the schedule screen, but you can see them here in Pocket. So really handy for providers. Kind of on the fly, you're like, hey, what does my day entail? Not just for patients, but also for blocks that are on my schedule. I can see that within Pocket, and so all that kind of notation is really quite slick. We can move back and forth in our schedule as well, just using those icons. The travel time, I swear, for a mouse takes so much longer than like with a finger. I can just bop back and forth. And I'll show you guys some cool features that you can use here in Pocket that might actually be a game changer for you in terms of some of your day-to-day charting and signing. So we have our schedule screen. We have the Find Patient feature where I can sit here and I can type in a patient's name, and it's going to pull up those results for me. It includes things like who the PCP is, what the flags are, date of birth, age, sex. Okay. That would then take me into a chart. One of the things I love about Pocket is how fast it is. Okay. With the EHR, there's so much we have to load in when you think about it. Everything from immunization forecasting, documents, and all sorts of stuff. Where the web environment being so lightweight makes those load times really fast. So that's one of the really cool features of it, is just that fast, lightweight approach. We do have our RxQ. Morgan, was going to jam some results in here, but I think we got way late on the way in here. So this one doesn't show any results, but the results here for the RxQ would be very simple, just pending prescription type entries. The full RxQ is going to be available back in the EHR, but we wanted to give you access to at least the things that were pending in here. And then we do have our messaging queue. Your messaging queue, like any part of the EHR, does have that ability to be filtered. So this is where you can decide what are the filters for you uniquely. Click that gear icon, and you will see that presented in a few different places inside PocketPCC. But I can choose the task types, who the assigned users are, the days that I want to look at. Days all, last number of days. A due date, if I'm putting due dates on messaging tasks and I want to see things that are coming due or that are overdue, I can use that as a way to toggle through that list. And then the display of all statuses, do I want everything or just those that are not completed? That's where I can make these kinds of changes, okay? And hit done, and that's going to filter then my results. Yes?
Quick question. I see that you can filter the messages by provider, but on the RxQ, when I look at mine, I see all my partners' prescriptions. Is there a way to just have your own prescriptions that are pending there?
Yeah, there was a really good question. Is there any way with the RxQ to filter, so that it's not showing everybody? And in chatting with Morgan, I I'd ask like, hey, is that a possibility? And really at this point, the filtering is not yet available on that front with the RX. I think that's, one of those future enhancements. We basically, we made it available. It's going to give you everything, unfortunately, but that's on the backlog for future enhancement. So again, it is, intended, kind of be that lightweight approach, and I think we'll have to add some more functionality there to filter. The filtering that we did with like this gear icon, that's something we've built that works with the rest of the queues. The RX queue is, a very interesting, different type of program that's inside PCCHR. It's kind of a web window, and so we would have to build something that's, I think, a bit more novel for that to be possible. But good question. So, here, again, we can see, a variety of, tasks that are here, and, act upon those. And so, as I had mentioned with, the visibility, I put together a quick portal message for myself, this morning about one of the patients and said, hey, they had a rash on their hands, and, should we bring them in? We've given an antihistamine to try to, lessen the hives. And what's really cool, again, is, as I mentioned, you can see that, drafts, or that little view of, the document, which you couldn't see previously. So think about somebody sending in a photo. Now, instead of having to download that to your device, you can see it. Okay. I mean, hopefully it's large enough that you can actually make sense of it. If you're using like a really tiny iPhone or something like that, you might need to still download it to your device. But gives you that great visibility. And from here, you can complete that task. You can follow up as necessary. You can add additional tasks. You can choose to reply to that portal message. So right here, I'm in Pocket. If I wanted to reply to the family and say, yeah, let's bring her in. How's 8 a.m. tomorrow morning? Okay, I can quickly send that off, right through Pocket. Probably a lot faster on my phone as opposed to me, leaning over here to type. But, ultimately it gives you that same functionality that you would have, okay? And, if I wanted to, I could add a task here maybe to my front desk to say, hey, let's make sure that they actually come in for an appointment. Add a follow-up. Right now it's considered unread, but if I want to make sure that the family sees it and follows up on it, I can add a follow-up task as well. So these are all things you can do inside Pocket. Really pretty slick. And if I added a task here for like appointment needed, we'll tag Jason. Jason Abels is going to get this one. Okay, I can save that. I'm going to move this over a little bit because it's in the way. Save and exit. That's going to save that task and make that so that that appointment is needed. And we can in fact see that right here, where now that appointment needed task has been created. It's assigned to Jason and ready to go, so that if they don't follow up with an appointment, I'm also asking one of my staff to do that. Okay. Then signing. This is one of my favorite features inside PocketPCC. And part of the reason is, one of the things, we often hear with the EHR is, there's travel time. We think about moving back and forth between parts of the system, going from over here to down below. There's a move that, that cursor that takes some time. And there's also a load time when you click into a chart. How many folks have, sat there with like a chart that has a ton of data in it, you click to open it up, and it takes like a good 5, 10, maybe even more seconds to open, right? That'll happen periodically. With Pocket, you're not going to get that same experience. It's pretty lightweight in that regard. One of the things I really like with Pocket in particular is the signing feature in Pocket. So instead of displaying everything here, let me look at things that are just ready to sign, okay? And let's say just visits, right? And this is where I could filter by provider as well if I wanted to. So if I'm Dr. Casey, and Dr. Casey is provider of the day, and it's my job to sign off on all of those immunization-only visits that my nurses saw. I mean, how many of you have that situation in your office where you're having, some doctor, that day sign off on all those visits? No one? We have some practices that they do that. They have a doctor whose job it is that day to sign off on every single one of those visits. And you can think about, like, inside the EHR, if you had to navigate to that particular user, those nurses, and go through that list and sign off on every single one of those, the amount of time that would take. If it's a 5-second opening, travel time down below to click sign, that becomes a time-intensive task. There was a practice that I worked with, a provider reached out to me and said, hey, did you know about this with PocketPCC and the signing and how fast it is? I'm like, I mean, I know a lot of things in PocketPCC are faster, but what's the story there? And he had shared with me that he and his partners had that kind of setup where they would have 300 plus vaccine-only visits in a day, rather large practice, and there would be one person whose job it was to sign off on those. And so you could think about like that person goes home at the end of the day and has to sit there and sign off on every single one of those visits. Now, at a 3 to 5 second open time per chart, that really starts to stack up, right? He said where it would usually take him over an hour sometimes to sign off on all those visits, he could usually do those in PocketPCC in about 10 minutes. Okay? Because literally what he was doing, just click in, make sure everything was there, click sign, and just repeat that same process over and over and over again. But that repetitive task that would take all that extra travel time, all that extra chart open time, was so much faster. Clicking in here, almost immediate. He'd scroll down, hit sign, on to the next one. Okay. Now again, this is going to be a little bit slower on desktop in a way, given that I have to move up and down with my cursor, but with a finger, it moves a lot faster. So something to consider. If you're in a situation where you've got a lot of visits assigned that are fairly rote, and it's really just more of a perfunctory thing that you have to sign off on them, PocketPCC is quite handy in that regard. I think it's also a nice visual of your note. It's just that top-down visual. So you may find that some of the signing becomes a thing that you like to do inside Pocket. And as I click that pencil icon, I can actually get into that visit and make some changes. Okay, not changes to everything. There are elements that we can't update inside Pocket, as I mentioned, things like orders and other elements may not be available. Diagnoses, for example, are not currently available inside Pocket, but there's a lot that you can access. I did find out earlier that there's a bug currently that we're working on fixing with Pocket where, the generic components that you have, things like your radio button components, as we see here, the abnormal, normal, not examined types and the like are all available inside Pocket, but checkbox components or generic checkbox components had disappeared. So in our 10.4 release, we're fixing that, and it's possible that might be coming out even sooner, okay? But we can edit those things, using that pencil icon, so that's gonna be something more universal that you'll see throughout. And anytime you see a pencil, it's an indicator of an edit. If you see a gear icon, it's an indicator of a filter, okay? So here right now, if I'm clicking that gear icon, that's for policies, and letting me see, the policies that are active versus expired. We do also have that kind of patient glob, as we call it, or patient banner that exists inside Pocket. So if I click there, additional information will show up. And that's inside a visit. Now, when I'm inside a patient record, again, there are elements that I can get into, and quite a few, in fact. We've got things like our medical summary that we can access here, and these are going to be all the same medical summary components that you do have. Some which are editable, some which are not in a way, or I should say filterable. But for things like your care for care plans, for medication history and the like, you can see active and active resolved and choose your toggles. And there's some memory here as well inside the system as you make those settings. Demographics as well, I can see that full demographic record. We've added a lot more over time. Think about things like account balances and encounters with personal balances. As I click here, it's going to show me all the encounters that have personal balances. So I have a question about what's the balance here and why. I can see those details now in Pocket. And likewise, details about the insurance plans and the like. Maybe, knowing what insurance may be, helpful to a provider. Some of these details may not be, quite as much, but this is where, again, depending on which staff are using this, it may be helpful to them. Your visit history is, much the same as your entire visit history inside the EHR. And this too is filterable. When we think about, visit history inside the EHR, you have all these elements, ERX encounters, phone notes, portal messages, and the like. And you can, again, filter this so that maybe you're only concerned with, right now, visits, phone notes, and portal messages is the primary. You hit done, it's going to filter those other elements out so that you're focusing on just the things that you want to see. And this, again, would give you
a fairly full note. Of course, these test examples have a limited amount of data inside them, but what you've written inside those visits is going to be available and visible. Not all of it editable, but certainly visible to you. And over time, we've added things like Chattis results inside Pocket so that you can see the Chattis information. A lot more information has become visible inside Pocket, making it very fully featured. So we have our visit history. We have our immunization history as well. Looks very much like that kind of summary of care that just the general information sheets that we print out, where we'll show the vaccination and the dates beneath it. Okay. And then any recorded diseases will be there as well. Again, we can't edit these entries from here. They would have to be edited inside the EHR, but it does create that visibility to the immunization history. And then documents. Jennifer Farrell doesn't have any, but let's go to Rhiannon, and we can take a look at documents inside her chart. So yeah, this will show any recent documents at the very top, and then anything else that's filed away according to its different categories will be available. And as mentioned, that document preview is available here. Okay, very useful for single pages, a little less useful for a multi-page document where, again, you're just going to see that preview, that first page. So if you need to see more of that information, you would download that to the device to be able to view it. And whenever you're downloading to the device, it's using whatever your native image viewer or PDF viewer is going to be. So if you're on Windows, it might be Adobe. On Mac, it's going to be Preview or whatever else you're using. Okay, and it'll ask about downloads. Do you want to be able to allow that? And then download that, and you can view it on your device. So those are our documents. PCC ERX. This feature is really cool. It looks almost exactly like ERX inside the chart. Just a little bit smaller in some ways, or a little bit cinched up in some areas, but all those functions that you're used to in terms of PCCRX are there. Vitals data, your pharmacies, your ability to add a pharmacy is available here. Okay, so I can pick pharmacies that are nearby, or use the practice zip code depending on what it is. Pick a pharmacy for the patient. I can choose new allergies, do an NKDA, but again, it's going to be very much the same as what you're used to in terms of filling in allergies for a patient, or doing a no known drug allergies right there. And the problem list, it'll show any problems that are charted for the patient, presents those here. Your prescription history, if there are any prescriptions, would show there as well. And there is the ability to update medication history. There are some things that we've done in terms of medication history, like multi-select cleanup, that haven't fully ported over to PCCRX here, but you get most of those capabilities in terms of med history cleanup here. I'll say patient takes no meds. And then prescribe, if I have any favorites, if I want to add a new medication, I can do all that right from here. And as I start to type in information, it'll say like, okay, there's Concerta oral as my option. And so the same type of functionality that we're used to with PCCRX becomes available. Okay, I can click the blue text, or I can click the green plus, hit save. This is currently unsigned. Now, being a controlled substance, I would need my hard token available for EPCS, so I would need to make sure that I've got that available. If that's something that you don't have access to or don't know where it is, if you want to be able to use EPCS within PocketPCC's ERX, that is something you will need access to. But same entire process that I have. In terms of generating prescriptions, it's all there inside PocketPCC. And in fact, although I didn't have any pending prescriptions at the moment when I first started, now that I've added this one, we've not yet submitted this out, so I will see pending prescriptions right here inside the RxQ. Yeah, go ahead.
So, this may be stupid, so sorry.
Sure. So if I'm going to use if I'm at dinner with my husband,
Yes.
and somebody is like, oh my God, my Concerta, it's got to be switched to their pharmacy because I finally found it after calling 14 different pharmacies. Can you switch it really quick before they give the last 30 away? And I wanted to send that. could I log into PocketPCC from my husband's phone and then use my Authy on my phone, so it's not on the same device?
No.
No.
Unfortunately, yeah. No, I was going to say.
Well, then I'll tell the parent I tried.
Yeah, no, because again, it has to be that hard token that's registered. Even though you're on a different device, technically, the soft tokens, are verboten. So, would be nice, but yeah, it's a requirement, unfortunately, that it's not coming from the same device, and so it's kind of hard to tell. Okay, well, you've got the soft token registered on your phone. We want to make sure that it's not the same thing. So, yeah, it's a good idea though. Good question. Yeah.
I'm like, I've already washed my hard token in my pocket once. So I'm not taking my hard token out of the office.
Right. Or you got to put in like one of those like water safe baggies like you use when you're kayaking or something like that. Just put it in that. So if it takes a swim in the toilet, you're okay.
Put an air tag on a description.
Yep. I mentioned the.
I have to know to go look for the air tag. And I've already washed it, so
Yep. Air tags are great. We literally have had somebody drop their hard token in the toilet. So they like to take a swim. I think they're friends with water.
To make a waterproof washing machine proof, sitting on it proof hard token.
Yeah, I feel like there's waterproof and then there's the washing machine proof, or kind of two different levels of waterproofing.
Different levels.
So yeah, again, we've got our PCC RX, we've got our RxQ here, which is again going to pull up just that patient since we're inside their chart. And then, last but not least, you get the ability to do some additional things in terms of adding to the record here. While we can't add a visit, we can do things like adding a photo or a file. When I go to add photo or file, this is going to use either my desktop's file structure or my phone's photo and file features. So if I were to select a photo or file here, it's going to go through the desktop windows and the like to pull up a file to add to the chart. But if I'm using a phone, it's going to let me take a picture or pull from my list of photos. Adding a phone note, very similar functionality to phone note inside the EHR. When we think about all those contact details, who took the call. In this case, it's noting that it's me, since I'm the person who's adding the phone note, that I'm logged in as Jim, so Jim Leahy took the call, and here's the date and time, and the caller's name pulls from the same types of info that we see inside the chart. So is Francine who is reaching out to me. Relationship fields are all very much the same. Return phone numbers will pull up phone numbers from the chart or anything that we've hand keyed into that, and then whether or not it needs to be signed by the provider. And then things like subject, phone note, tasks are going to be available here. You may have loaded your phone note with things like orders, and unfortunately, those kinds of things are not going to be editable here, where you can add orders to a phone note. So if you want to document a call, it's great for that. Okay, if you want to set up a task tomorrow to follow back up, schedule an appointment or follow up with the family, all things you can do inside Pocket. But those additional orders and things like that that you might have added to your phone note are not going to be accessible through here. And we'll discard that. Now, much like the rest of the EHR, if I start entering some data and I don't save, I get that warning that I've got unsaved data. Do I want to discard, cancel, save? I'll discard that. So the portal messages. Here I am, looking at, portal message for this patient, but I can go to even add a portal message and generate a portal message out. So maybe after, I call in that prescription, I want to just send a quick portal message to say, hey, this is ready for pickup, or will be ready for pickup at this pharmacy. I could do that, shoot off a portal message to that family member, okay? That's where I would, create a message, choose who it's to. That would be a drop down if there's more than one. Choose a subject, choose a message, and hit send. Okay, and that sends that out. And then again, I can do follow-up tasks, other replies, and additional tasks back to the rest of the office with Pocket. So we think about it, again, it has a lot of the features that we would generally need, inside PCC EHR, sans, some of the things that we might, be accessing on a daily basis. When we think about being outside the office, the ability to, do a prescription, to do a phone note, to send a portal message, view their immunization history, view their medical summary, all of that is going to be available inside Pocket. And further, I mentioned, with like the visit history, or with visits, that you have that capability. Now this particular patient doesn't have any visits, so let me go to one who does. I'll view the schedule here, go back a couple of days. But I mentioned how things like vitals could be, noted here inside PocketPCC. So when we think about, intake, that whole intake component that you guys have with the informant, any of the questions from the informant, the concerns they have, the vitals, so long as your MA isn't, placing orders in that case, a lot of the stuff that they're doing for intake is all right here. Okay, and if they need to place orders, they could do that back at a computer. But if you've got somebody who's kind of just running patients from room to room, and getting them worked up, getting the heights, weights, this could become a way to do a lot of the work that they would otherwise have to do without having to have a laptop that they carry around. Now, of course, if they want access to PocketPCC, if you want to grant them that access, there is that access privilege they need, inside user administration. They need to set that up inside My Account. And they're not going to be limited to access to PocketPCC just inside the office, okay? They would be able to access it outside the office as well. So that is something to consider. There's a certain amount of trust that you're giving to somebody who has that mobile access, okay? But it is handy. I think it's been a solution for some folks who wanted a replacement for a scratch pad. Instead of putting it on paper, you can just put it right in the chart, save yourself the time right then and there. So that does become another way to do some of this work. Alrighty. So that's most of what I wanted to demo with regard to Pocket. I could open it up to questions at this point, and there's also a poll that I wanted to offer up where we could take a look at features that you would like to see inside PocketPCC. But before I do that, do you folks have any questions, or anybody in the online audience?
No questions for the online audience.
Okay, they're all asleep. No kidding.
This is available to anybody who has, This is available to anybody in our office who has a login for our site, right? Or is it additional cost? Because when you talked about MAs using it for vitals.
Yeah, there's no additional cost. I mean, there are very few things that we would charge additionally for at PCC, and that's certainly not one of those things that we charge for. So the only thing that's required is that you would have to go into user administration and delegate them some role access. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there is that My Account feature that they have to go to. So they go into the file My Account, and they have to edit then that security question for themselves. So that's all they would need, in order to get PocketPCC access.
Thanks.
Good question. Alrighty. Well, I'm going to stop this share and then maybe go back to the regular laptop for the rest. Thank you guys for bearing with me, and Fisher for the help with the technical details, and Mark as well. We're going to jump over to Slido, okay? And for Slido, this is an opportunity for us to gather some information from you folks about enhancements or features you'd like to see added to PocketPCC. So you can either use the QR code that's there on the screen, or go to slido.com and enter that code there, the 2434026, and start typing that in. Amanda, I see you smiling over there.
Yeah, I love hearing this feedback.
Yeah. Amanda's I can let you introduce yourself as well, but Amanda's the business analyst for Delivery Team 34 at PCC, which is tasked with patient engagement in clinical tools, and PocketPCC is among those tools. So always nice to have somebody in the room who can take some of that feedback and add some of those features as well as time permits. In the past, the first thing we would always see with PocketPCC was ERX. I feel like we solved that. So the question is, what's next? At least solved much of it. That's really cool. So the ability, so this one is Doximity type phone function where you can call families and it would look like we're in the office. So basically just telemedicine. I like that. After the addition of VRX, it's almost perfect. don't know if there's somebody talking behind me or a video, but it's very distracting through the wall here. Can we chart on PocketPCC and do speech to text? I presume you can. I mean, I've not personally tried, but you know, with any browser type function where you've got a box, I mean, there shouldn't be any blocker to that. So good question. Ability to see chat messages. And then, yeah, the ability to limit the RX queue to one provider. Both really cool. Yeah, the chat message functionality would be interesting. Like a little, you know, button that opens up in the bottom that, you know, says, hey, you got a chat here. Appointment scheduling. Yep. Yeah, it'd be interesting to visualize the appointment book on a mobile device. Yeah, go ahead, Amanda.
So for appointment scheduling, I'm curious if what users of PocketPCC are looking for is more like the create visit functionality where you're forcing an appointment in, or do you want to see more like the appointment book style scheduling, or like the recently released portal scheduling where portal users are offered available times?
Yeah.
You know, which one are you really looking for in PocketPCC?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think, you know, depending on what you're looking for, like let's say that you're on the phone with somebody and trying to offer them an appointment, maybe what you just need is what's the next available in the morning, okay? Instead of saying, hey, come in at 8 a.m., you're like, do we have an opening? I mean, I could go look at my schedule to see what we've got, but it's like, you know, I want to reserve that time for them, so it could be that, you know, it could be a variety of things. So yeah, some context there would be helpful.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think it would be helpful to like see the appointment book, to see what's available, like times that are available.
Yeah, because right now you can see the schedule for like one provider at a time, but if you're trying to get that big picture, it's
Yeah.
like, okay, where can we put them in? Totally. Yeah, create a visit was what was noted here as well. So yeah, visit creation, maybe, you know, next available slot, something like that. A couple of different ways to approach that. Alrighty, any other thoughts, folks? Well, again, I want to thank everybody for, you know, bearing with the technical issues that we encountered, and you know, the savviness for us to, you know, get through that with the Zoom session. I think worked out pretty well. If you have additional questions, feel free to, you know, send those along. We're always interested in hearing more feedback on what you'd like to see in PocketPCC. But thank you all again. Appreciate it.